Hey everyone. On the story for today. My dad blamed me for mom's death and favored my sister. Then demanded I invite her to my wedding after she slept with my ex. This month, I married the love of my life, Zach. As newlyweds, you'd expect us to be basking in the joy of our honeymoon, planning our future, or just enjoying the bliss of starting this new chapter together. Instead, I find myself turning to Reddit today, desperate for clarity and advice because my father is making my life unbearable. Am I the one at fault here? Let me give you some context. The issue traces back to my decision to invite my dad to walk me down the aisle at my wedding. On the surface, this might sound like a sweet, typical gesture. However, it's important to note that my dad and I have never been close, mainly because of his attitude towards me. You see, my mom died while giving birth to me. At the time, my dad wasn't even there, he was away on a work trip. When my mom went into labor unexpectedly, there were complications. She suffered severe blood loss, and despite the doctor's efforts, they couldn't save her. By the time my dad returned, he was met with the devastating news that his wife was gone. All he had left was me, a newborn he never met and who, in his eyes, was responsible for his wife's death. This set the tone for everything that followed. Now I understand, on some level, that losing my mom the way he did must have been devastating for him. But over the years, it became clear that his grief had turned into resentment toward me. That resentment wasn't subtle. It was loud and evident in how he treated me. I've often felt like I was carrying the weight of guilt for something I had no control over, simply because I was the baby who survived when my mom didn't. My older sister Mary, who is 4 years older than me, once told me that during my early years, Dad wouldn't even look at me. She said he would tell everyone who would listen that I reminded him too much of Mom, and he didn't like that apparently. He hired a full-time nanny and I was left pretty much the whole day with her. As a result, I spent my childhood feeling neglected and unwanted. This rejection was something I grew up feeling deeply, even if it was never directly spelled out to me. While other kids had a loving dad to rely on, mine treated me like I barely existed. On the other hand, Mary was always Dad's favorite. That's not just my perspective, it's a fact that both Mary and I have acknowledged over the years. My dad didn't even try to hide it. He lavished her with attention and care in ways I could only dream of. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong while I was just there. I remember after I turned 10 or 11, I was assigned the role of the family helper. Dad would order me to do the household chores while Mary was exempt from lifting a finger. When I asked why, he would justify it by saying that Mary needed to focus on her studies and shouldn't be bothered with tasks like washing dishes or doing laundry. But for me, he said I should learn to handle those things because I wasn't as good at academics as Mary and might end up being a stay-at-home wife. Obviously this was unfair, but he didn't care. I was left to pick up the slack. I would clean, scrub, and fold clothes, and if I ever dared to complain or ask for help, Dad would get angry. He threatened to ground me or take away my phone, which, as a kid, felt like the ultimate punishment. If I wanted something, a new outfit, a book, anything, I was told it was unnecessary or a waste of money. Meanwhile, Mary seemed to get everything she wanted without so much as a second thought. If I was stranded somewhere and called him to pick me up, he would flat out refuse and tell me to figure it out on my own, even if that meant walking home alone. But if Mary needed a ride, whether it was 5 minutes away or an hour, Dad would drop everything to be there for her. There were no questions, no excuses, just unwavering dedication for her. The unfairness was maddening. Over time, Mary also started leveraging Dad's bias to make my life even harder. For instance, if something around the house broke, she would immediately blame me, knowing full well that no matter how much I denied it or explained what actually happened, Dad would side with her and punish me. Mary would use my love for arts and crafts as a way to belittle me. I've always been a creative person, finding joy in making things with my hands. But Mary would use this passion against me, mocking me to Dad, saying how girly and childish I was and how arts and crafts were just for losers. He would do nothing to defend me and would instead mock me alongside her. It hurt deeply because it was something that made me happy, and yet it became another reason for my family to treat me like I didn't measure up. On occasions, whenever I disagreed with Dad or stood up for myself, Mary would swoop in to defend him, painting me as a disrespectful and difficult child. Once, during an argument, she even went as far as saying that Mom would have been ashamed to have given birth to someone like me. She added that she wished I had died instead of Mom, as I was making her and Dad's life miserable. That statement shattered me. Can you imagine what happens when you hear such things from your own sibling and father almost every other day? You learn to live in guilt and start keeping things to yourself. Because of all this, I learned to be extremely cautious around both Mary and Dad. I felt like I was walking on eggshells all the time, constantly on guard to avoid doing or saying anything that might trigger their criticism or punishment. I was tired of getting blamed for Mom's death. I started counting down the years and days until I could leave for college, and when I finally got the chance, I didn't look back. I moved out and eventually got my own job, so I could support myself. It felt like I finally had a taste of freedom, the ability to live life on my own terms without my dad and sister's constant shadow hanging over me. After I moved out, things with Dad improved slightly, not because we became closer, but because we didn't see each other often anymore. The physical distance made it easier to avoid fights or tense encounters. Meanwhile, Mary, who never pursued a steady job, stayed with Dad rent-free over the years. She would claim to everyone that this was her strategy to save money when in reality, I knew she just liked being coddled and favored by my dad. He liked taking care of her, even though she was a full-grown adult who should have been taught to be more independent and responsible, and she gladly let him. Once on Thanksgiving, Dad had invited me and my then-boyfriend to spend the holidays at his house. I wasn't thrilled about it. I wasn't close with them, but I agreed out of politeness. My boyfriend and I decided we would only stay for 3 nights and then spend the rest of the holiday with his family, where things were warmer and more welcoming. When Mary met my ex during that Thanksgiving visit, things took a turn for the worse. From the moment they were introduced, she was constantly flirting with him in ways that felt entirely inappropriate. She kept showering him with compliments, calling him handsome and gorgeous, while subtly putting me down by saying she never thought her ugly duckling of a sister would end up with someone like him. I was obviously offended, but I didn't want to start a fight with her in front of my then-boyfriend. However, her behavior crossed the line when she began finding excuses to touch him, light brushes on his arm, leaning in too close, or playful taps on his shoulder. It wasn't just uncomfortable for me, it was incredibly disrespectful. This is when I tried to handle the situation maturely. I pulled her aside and politely asked her to tone it down, explaining that her actions might be making him uncomfortable. But Mary, true to form, brushed me off, saying I was overreacting and that I should stop bringing the evening down with my jealousy. She dismissed my concerns as if they were trivial, even laughing at me. After dinner, Dad went upstairs to his room, leaving me, Mary, and my ex to watch a movie together in the living room. What should have been a cozy, relaxed evening quickly turned into another uncomfortable situation. Throughout the movie, Mary kept finding reasons to play fight with my ex, like a child, nudging him, teasing him, and leaning into his personal space. What made it even worse was that my ex seemed to be enjoying all the attention. While I wouldn't say he was openly reciprocating her flirtation, he certainly wasn't discouraging it either. Seeing them both, I felt completely sidelined, like I was the third wheel to my own boyfriend and sister. It was humiliating. At some point during the movie, I couldn't take it anymore. I was tired emotionally and physically, and the weight of feeling disrespected in my own family's home was too much. I excused myself and went upstairs to get some sleep, leaving them alone to finish the movie. I thought my boyfriend would eventually join me in my room, but he never did. The next morning, I woke up early, and the house was eerily quiet. Something felt off immediately, especially since I noticed that my then-boyfriend hadn't slept beside me at all throughout the night. Concerned and a little suspicious, I decided to go downstairs to check on him, thinking maybe he'd fallen asleep on the couch while watching the movie. But he wasn't there. A pit began to form in my stomach as I thought about where else he could be. Against my better judgment, I walked toward Mary's room, my heart pounding. I opened the door, and there they were, my worst fear playing out before my eyes. My ex and my sister were sleeping in bed together, half naked. On the floor beside them were 2 empty wine bottles and glasses. The sight made me feel sick to my core. My head spun with disbelief and anger as I realized that he had slept with my sister. Of all the people he could have cheated on me with, it was Mary. My sister. The one person who had already made my life miserable for as long as I could remember. I couldn't hold back my rage. I screamed, startling them awake. They both looked startled and panicked as I began angrily throwing pillows at them. My ex started stammering apologies, claiming over and over that it was a mistake and blaming the alcohol. He said they'd both been too drunk to know what they were doing, as if that was supposed to excuse their actions. His words only made me angry, or drunkenness doesn't erase betrayal. What hurt even more was Mary's reaction. She never apologized. She didn't even seem embarrassed or regretful. Instead, she had the audacity to tell me to get out of her room so that she could get dressed. She yelled at me for invading her privacy, as if I was the one in the wrong for catching them in the act. Her complete lack of remorse, her arrogance, and her attempt to turn the situation around on me left me speechless. When I told my dad what had happened, I expected at the very least that he would share in my outrage or offer some kind of support. Initially, he seemed just as shocked and appalled as I was. For a brief moment, I thought he might actually stand by me. But then his tone shifted, and he told me in no uncertain terms that while he didn't support Mary's actions, he wasn't going to interfere because Mary and my ex were both adults, so they were allowed to do whatever it was that they wanted. He acted as if my sister sleeping with my then boyfriend was a mistake that could simply be swept under the rug rather than a monumental betrayal. What made it worse was how Dad tried to turn the blame back onto me. According to him, I should have been more careful about the kind of man I brought into the family. He said my ex had a loose character, so it was basically my fault for bringing him around Mary. It was as if he believed I should have somehow predicted my ex's betrayal, or, worse, that I had knowingly set myself up for this heartbreak. His comments made me feel like I was losing my grip on reality. My sister was not an innocent bystander in this situation. She actively pursued my ex, knowing full well how much it would hurt me. Yet my dad completely downplayed her role, almost absolving her of anything while piling the blame entirely on me. It was like he refused to hold Mary accountable for anything she did, no matter how blatantly cruel or selfish it was. Ultimately, I knew what I had to do. I broke up with my ex immediately. There was no coming back from what he had done, and I couldn't stay with someone who would betray me so deeply, especially with my own sister. As for Mary, I cut all ties with her after this. She never apologized or showed even a shred of remorse. Instead, she took the situation and turned it into something to brag about. She went around telling our cousins about how she stole my man in one night, and even boasted that he had apparently told her she was better in bed than me. It was vile and humiliating, and she said it all with pride, as if hurting me was some kind of twisted victory for her. My relationship with my dad also fractured. His refusal to hold Mary accountable and his decision to side with her, even indirectly, was the final straw. I went into no contact with him. Dad would sometimes try to reach out to me to smooth things over, but I would refuse any communication. However, things then changed out of nowhere. Earlier this year, my dad had a major health scare. It was serious, and while the doctors were able to save him, the experience left him weak and in need of care. Despite all the pain and resentment I harbored, I was the one who stepped up to help him, not out of obligation, but because I knew I had the means and the heart to do it. I had already lost my mom, and despite everything, I didn't want to lose my dad too. I took on a lot of the responsibilities for his recovery. I paid for medical bills that his insurance didn't cover and hired a caretaker to ensure he was comfortable and recovering well at home. It wasn't easy, but I did it because it felt like the right thing to do. My sister, on the other hand, did little to nothing to help. Her salary isn't enough to pay for anything substantial, and she didn't seem particularly inclined to contribute, either. She just let me handle all of Dad's responsibilities. I guess during this time, Dad's eyes finally opened to the truth. He realized how much I was taking care of him while Mary wasn't lifting a finger. Unexpectedly, he apologized to me. He acknowledged how he had treated me growing up, how he had failed to be there for me, and how he had let Mary's actions slide when they hurt me the most. For the first time in my life, I felt like Dad truly saw the pain he had caused me. It was a healing moment, and while it didn't erase everything, it opened the door for us to start rebuilding our relationship. We began talking more, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like there was hope for us. So, when I started planning my wedding, inviting my dad felt like the right thing to do. Our relationship seemed to be slowly improving, and despite everything, I wanted him to be there for such an important moment in my life. However, inviting Mary was out of the question. She had never apologized or showed me that she felt remorse for what she had done to me. She and I had no relationship, and I wanted to keep it that way. But my dad, perhaps emboldened by our renewed connection, began to push for me to invite her. He insisted that Mary had changed and deserved a second chance. I asked him if she had really changed, then why she hadn't reached out to me even once to apologize. If she was remorseful, surely an apology wouldn't be too much to ask. But instead of understanding my perspective, Dad doubled down, saying I should let bygones be bygones and not pester Mary for an apology. He argued that it had been years since the incident with my ex, and that my wedding was the perfect opportunity for a fresh start for all of us. I couldn't believe he was asking this of me. After everything I'd been through, after everything Mary had done, he wanted me to just forgive and forget without so much as an acknowledgement from her of the harm she'd caused. It felt like yet another example of him excusing her behavior while expecting me to take the high road. But this time, I wasn't going to let that happen. I put my foot down and told him no. If Mary wanted to make amends, the first step was an apology, and until that happened, she had no place in my life, much less at my wedding. This is when my dad flat out said that if Mary wasn't invited, he wouldn't be attending either, nor would he walk me down the aisle. He even tried to manipulate me by saying that their absence would cause people to gossip, and that it would reflect poorly on me for not having them by my side on such an important occasion. I realized that this was yet another instance of him trying to control the situation and guilt me into doing what he wanted. But I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to let him or anyone else manipulate me, so I disinvited him altogether. If he wasn't going to respect my boundaries, then he didn't deserve to be part of my special day. Instead, I turned to my paternal grandfather and asked him to walk me down the aisle. When I told Grandpa about the situation, he immediately agreed. He was honored to take on the role, and he didn't hesitate to express his disappointment in my dad's behavior. Grandpa, like many others in our family, knew about my dad's favoritism and how he blamed me for my mother's death all my life. He was deeply disappointed that even now, after everything, Dad hadn't changed. Anyway, my wedding day was beautiful. Grandpa walked me down the aisle with pride, and we had an amazing time celebrating with the people who truly cared about me and my happiness. It felt like the fresh start I had always dreamed of, surrounded by love and support. But of course, my dad wasn't going to let things go so easily. After the wedding, when he found out what had happened, he threw a massive tantrum. He called me, outraged, and said he couldn't believe I had gone through with the wedding without him. He admitted that he had fully expected me to back down and invite him back. He was livid that I had asked Grandpa to take his place, insisting that Grandpa had no right to walk me down the aisle. What really seemed to push Dad over the edge, though, was the wedding gift I had received from Grandpa. You see, during the reception, Grandpa, who had been so supportive towards me throughout this entire process, made a surprising announcement. He said he was giving me his vacation house as a wedding gift, wanting me and my husband to make new memories there. This was completely unexpected, and I was overwhelmed with gratitude. Grandpa told me that he believed, out of Mary and me, it was me who truly appreciated the value of family and the memories that came with the house. He said he knew I would cherish it and take care of it, just as he had. His gesture meant everything to me, but it has infuriated my dad. As Grandpa's only child, Dad had always assumed he would inherit everything, including the vacation house. Now that it has been gifted to me, Dad sees this as a betrayal on my part. Since the wedding, my dad and Mary have been relentlessly accusing me of stealing the vacation house from them. They insist that it's my dad's legal right to inherit it as Grandpa's only child and have been pressuring me to give it back to him. The accusations are as unfair as they are absurd. Mary, predictably, has been the loudest, egging Dad on and portraying me as some kind of an opportunist who manipulated and took advantage of Grandpa's generosity. So Ida? Update 1, answering a few of the most asked questions here. Is your sister married? No, my sister isn't married yet. She hates commitment and doesn't stay in long-term relationships with anyone. Why does your adult sister still stay with your dad? Well, it's because Mary is my dad's golden child, and he's her safety net. They have always had a codependent relationship, and it seems to work for them. Ed loves to spoil her endlessly. While I've worked hard to stand on my own, Mary continues to rely on my dad for everything. She neither has a steady job nor does she have any savings. Why didn't your grandparents help you out earlier by standing up to your dad? They did. My grandparents have always been a part of my life and have tried to help me as much as they could. They did try to talk to my dad several times, but my dad never changed. At the end of the day, it wasn't their responsibility to raise me, it was my dad's. He should have stepped up, taken accountability, and been the parent I needed. I understand that he was grieving and that losing my mom was devastating for him, but that doesn't excuse his neglect or favoritism. As a child, all I felt was unloved and unwanted. Dad was the adult, the parent, and he should have been the one to rise above his grief and take care of me. Has your dad dated anyone after your mom passed away? No, my dad has remained single all these years. He still mourns the loss of my mom to this day. I don't think he ever truly healed from her passing. So, today I met with Dad. He had been incessantly calling and messaging me for weeks, and I finally decided that it was better to meet him face to face and put an end to this ongoing drama. When we met, I firmly told him that I wasn't going to give the vacation house to him, and that he needed to let go of the idea that he was entitled to inherit it. Grandpa had given it to me as a gift, and his decision was final. My dad, as expected, didn't take this well. He called me selfish and manipulative, accusing me of stealing something that rightfully belonged to him. He told me how I had already taken so much from him over the years, and even now I seemed to have taken another thing from him. His words didn't surprise me, but they still stung. This is when I looked him in the eye and asked him directly, "Why do you hate me so much? What have I ever done to you?" My question seemed to catch him off guard. I could see Dad falter for a moment, but I pressed on. I told him that I've always known he blamed me for my mother's death, but was that the only reason for his hatred? I reminded him that I was just a baby when Mom died, so what did he expect me to do to save her? I was innocent, and if anyone should feel guilty, it was him for not being there when she needed him the most. He should have been there for my mom rather than being away on a work trip. I told Dad that it wasn't fair for him to continuously project his guilt and grief onto me. It wasn't my fault, and it never had been. Yet, he had spent my entire life punishing me for something that was beyond my control. I could feel the weight of my words hanging in the air. At first, my dad tried to avoid answering me anything straight, but I pressed on. I told him that this was his chance to finally say whatever was on his mind once and for all. This is when my dad finally admitted the truth. He told me that he never wanted a second child and that when Mom got pregnant with me, he was against it. He explained how, despite the doctors warning her about the risks, Mom had insisted on having me, and Dad had urged her to abort. Ultimately, it was her decision and he couldn't do anything about it. So, when she died giving birth to me, he blamed me for taking her away from him. He told me that for years, he wished I had never been born and that, as I grew older and started to look more like her, it only made him miss Mom even more. My heart broke as he spoke. Dad told me that only after I took care of him this year following his health scare did he realize that I was also more like Mom in other ways, especially in how caring and giving I am, just like she was. This is when he finally started to feel this overwhelming sense of guilt, and that is when he apologized to me. He told me he genuinely regretted the way he treated me, but he just couldn't help himself since my sister was easier than me. He admitted that Mary never reminded him of Mom, she was more like him, and never made him confront his own pain. Then, my dad told me how he had hoped my wedding could fix everything. He had hoped to show up as a united family at my wedding. But when I didn't invite Mary and disinvited him, I had apparently ruined everything. He said that me asking Grandpa to walk me down the aisle was the biggest betrayal I could have done to him, and that I robbed him of the experience as a father. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything he had put me through, he still had the audacity to point fingers at me. It was as if I was the one who had wronged him when all I had ever done was try to heal a relationship that was always one-sided. I scoffed at his words, feeling both angry and numb. I told him that clearly I was never going to be good enough for him. Clearly, I was always going to be the scapegoat of the family, no matter what. At this point, I was just done trying to fix things with him. He didn't deserve my effort or my care anymore. I told him that if he ever found himself in the hospital again, he shouldn't expect me to pay his medical bills or help him out anymore. Instead, he should rely on his precious daughter, Mary, who can't even take care of her own finances every month. I also reminded Dad that Grandpa had given me the vacation house all on his own. I told him if he had a problem with that, he could take it up with Grandpa because I was done trying to explain myself or justify my actions. Dad tried to argue further, but I quickly left as I was done listening to him. Since then, Dad has been calling me several times, but I haven't bothered even picking up. At this point, I am just done with his toxic presence and want to concentrate on my marriage. Throughout all this, my husband, Zach, has been an amazing support. He understands my family's issues and supports me. It's been almost a month since my last update. Even after our conversation, my dad didn't give up trying to guilt trip me. He kept sending me text after text filled with apologies, trying to make me change my mind about everything. He apologized for the way he treated me and for the things he said, hoping that I might soften and reconsider my decision to cut him off. He told me that he would really need me by his side whenever he was sick in the future, since I was the only one he could trust enough to take care of him. But no matter how many times I read his messages, they didn't change anything. His words felt empty, too little, too late. His apologies were just another attempt to regain control, and I wasn't buying it anymore. Meanwhile, Mary sent me a long, angry message blaming me for everything. She told me how it was unfair of me to threaten to cut off Dad and that he had already suffered a lot because of me. She also told me that because of me, she had to grow up without a mother. According to her, I am a curse in everyone's life. And it is my fault that our family is broken. She even went as far as to claim that I had stolen the vacation house from Dad and that I would get my karma. I didn't waste my time replying to her and just blocked her. She can cry and scream all she wants, but the vacation house is mine and there's nothing she can do about it. Well folks, that will be all for today. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Stay safe everyone.